Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jake Thornfield and I've been a ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 22 years. In all that time, I've seen bears charge campers, helped pull bodies from rivers, and dealt with more lost hikers than I can count. But I've never believed in ghosts. Mountain folk love their stories, tales passed down through generations about witches and haints and things that go bump in the night. I always figured they were just ways to explain what people couldn't understand back then. The Bell Witch legend was one I'd heard 1,000 times. How back in the 1800s, some invisible force terrorized the Bell family over in Adams County. Pulled hair, slapped faces, threw furniture around. Supposedly, even killed the old man, John Bell himself. Tour guides at the nearby historic sites love telling visitors about it, especially around Halloween. Good for business, I suppose. I never gave it much thought until October 15th, 1974. That's a date that's burned into my memory now, carved there like initials on a tree trunk. I was working the Cades Cove area that morning, about 25 miles from the nearest town, deep in the heart of the Smokies. It's beautiful country, with rolling meadows surrounded by ancient mountains that seem to touch the sky. Lots of old cabins scattered throughout, most of them restored for tourists. The Park Service had been working on one particular cabin for months, trying to get it ready for the next season. That's where I found them. The call came in around 7 a.m. Maintenance crew was supposed to start work on the cabin's foundation, but when they arrived, they found the door standing wide open. That was strange enough. We always keep the historic buildings locked up tight, but what they found inside made them run back to their truck and radio for help. 5 people. A whole family from Nashville who'd somehow gotten inside the night before. Parents, 2 teenage kids, and a grandmother. All dead. Just sitting around the old wooden table like they were having dinner. No food, no dishes. Just sitting there with their eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I've seen death before. Car accidents, heart attacks, hunting mishaps. But I'd never seen anything like this. Their faces. Jesus, their faces. They looked absolutely terrified, like they'd seen something so awful it had literally scared them to death. The coroner would later say, their hearts just stopped. All 5 of them, at the same time. No wounds, no poison, no explanation at all. The temperature inside that cabin was wrong too. It was a warm October day, probably 70 degrees outside, but inside felt like a freezer. My breath came out in little puffs and I could see frost forming on the windows, even though the sun was shining bright outside. I radioed back to headquarters, reported what I'd found. Within an hour, the place was crawling with county sheriff deputies and state investigators. They photographed everything, took statements from the maintenance crew, started asking questions nobody had good answers for. While they were working, I walked around the outside of the cabin looking for any clue about how the family had gotten in. The lock was intact. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. It was like they'd just materialized inside. That's when I first heard it. I was checking the back of the cabin when my radio crackled to life, but instead of dispatcher chatter, I heard voices, old voices, speaking in the slow drawl of mountain people from a century past. "The Bells are back," one voice said, clear as day. "She knows they're back." I grabbed the radio, pressed the talk button. "Say again, headquarters. I didn't copy that." "Copy what, Jake? We haven't transmitted anything in the last 10 minutes. I stared at the radio in my hand. The voices were gone, replaced by normal static. But I knew what I'd heard, and something about those words made my skin crawl. My grandmother had been a Bell. Sarah Bell Thornfield. She'd died when I was 12, but I remembered her stories about the old country, about Tennessee in the early days. She'd never talked much about her family history, always seemed uncomfortable when the subject came up. Standing there behind that cabin, with 5 dead people inside and frost on the windows in 70-degree weather, I started to wonder if maybe there were some family stories I'd never been told. The official investigation wrapped up after 3 days. Heart failure, they determined. All 5 members of the Garrett family had suffered simultaneous cardiac arrest. The investigators called it a medical anomaly, maybe triggered by carbon monoxide from an old heating system, even though the cabin didn't have one. I knew better. I'd been in that cabin a dozen times over the years during restoration work, and it had never been cold like that. Equipment doesn't just fail for no reason, and people don't all die of fright at the same time. But I kept my mouth shut. Nobody wants to hear a park ranger talking about ghosts. The cabin was sealed off while they finished their investigation, but I found excuses to patrol the area more often than necessary. Something was drawing me back there, like an itch I couldn't scratch. On the 4th night after finding the bodies, I was driving the loop road around sunset when I saw smoke coming from the cabin's chimney. That stopped me cold. The place was supposed to be empty, locked up tight. I parked the truck and approached on foot, my flashlight in one hand and radio in the other. The front door was open again. I called it in, requested backup, but was told it would be at least an hour before anyone could get there. Standard procedure said to wait, but something told me an hour might be too long. The smell hit me first when I got close to the door. Not wood smoke from the chimney, but something else. Something rotten and sweet like fee. Lowers left too long in standing water. It was coming from inside the cabin. "Hello?" I called out. "Park service? Anyone in there?" No answer. But I could hear something. A sound like whispering, so soft I almost missed it over the wind in the trees. I stepped inside, flashlight beam sweeping across the room. The air was freezing again, even colder than it had been when we found the bodies. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. I shook it, tried the switch. Nothing. Brand new batteries that morning, but dead as a rock. That's when the whispering got louder. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, like the walls themselves were talking. I couldn't make out words at first, just the sound of voices layered on top of each other. Old voices speaking in dialect I could barely understand. Then, clear as if someone was standing right next to me. "Jake Thornfield, Sarah's boy." My blood turned to ice water. Nobody had called me that since my grandmother died 15 years ago. "Who's there?" My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "You know who I am, boy. Your grandmammy knew. She told you stories, didn't she? About the old country, about the family that had to leave Tennessee in such a hurry." I fumbled for my backup flashlight, hands shaking. When the beam finally cut through the darkness, I nearly dropped it. Scratch marks were appearing on the cabin walls. Deep gouges in the old wood, forming letters as I watched. B-E-L-L. The Garretts weren't the first, the voice continued, and now I could tell it was female, with the accent of someone who'd been dead for more than a century. "Won't be the last, neither. I got a long memory, Jake Thornfield. Long as the mountains themselves." Something invisible slammed into my chest, sent me flying backward into the doorframe. The impact knocked the wind out of me, left me gasping on the cabin floor. Hen, I looked up. More words were carving themselves into the wall. "You can't hide from family." I scrambled to my feet and ran. Ran like I hadn't run since I was a kid. Burst out of that cabin, and didn't stop until I reached my truck. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition, but as I drove away, I could swear I heard laughter following me down the mountain. Old laughter, full of malice and patient hunger. That night, I went through my grandmother's things, items I'd kept stored in the attic since she passed, boxes I'd never bothered to open, birth certificates, family Bible, old photographs, yellow with age. And there it was, in her own handwriting. A family tree that traced our line back to John Bell of Adams County, Tennessee. The same John Bell from the witch stories. At the bottom of the page, in my grandmother's careful script, "The curse follows the blood." We thought we could run from it. We were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice echoing in my head. Long as the mountains themselves. My daughter Emma was 16 that year, a junior at the high school in town. Smart as a whip, planned to study biology in college, maybe become a park naturalist like her old man. She was my world, had been ever since her mother passed when Emma was just 8. The morning after my encounter in the cabin, Emma mentioned her school was planning a field trip to Cades Cove, environmental science class, studying the ecosystem of the restored historical areas. "Dad, you look terrible," she said over breakfast. "You feeling okay?" I wasn't okay. Hadn't been since that thing, whatever it was, threw me across the cabin floor. The bruises on my chest were turning purple and I'd been jumping at every shadow. "Just didn't sleep well," I told her. "Listen, about that field trip." "Oh no, you're not going to embarrass me in front of my class, are you? I promise we'll stay on the marked trails." "It's not that, maybe this isn't the best time for school groups in that area." She gave me that look. Teenager's perfect around age 14, the one that says Dad's being weird again. "It's just a field trip. What's the worst that could happen?" I wanted to tell her. Wanted to explain about the voices and the scratches on the wall and the family tree hidden in Grandma's papers. But how do you tell your daughter that your family is cursed by something that's been dead for over a century? Instead, I made her promise to stay with the group and call me if anything felt wrong. Anything at all. The field trip was scheduled for Thursday. On Tuesday night, I drove back to the cabin. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe that I could face this thing down, find some way to protect Emma. Maybe I just needed to know if I was losing my mind. The cabin looked different in the moonlight, older somehow, like it had aged decades in the past week. The wood looked more weathered, the windows darker. Even the surrounding trees seemed to lean away from it, as if they didn't want to get too close. This time, I came prepared. New flashlight, backup batteries, emergency flares, and a tape recorder. Figured if I was going crazy, at least I'd have proof. The door was closed, but when I tried the handle, it turned easily. The lock had been broken from the inside, metal twisted like something with incredible strength had simply snapped it. The temperature drop hit me like walking into a freezer. My breath came out in clouds, and frost was already forming on the windows. But this time, I was ready for it. "I know you're here," I said to the empty room. "I know what you are." The response was immediate. A sound like wind through dry leaves, except there was no wind inside the cabin. Then, that voice again, closer now, like someone whispering directly in my ear. "Do you, boy? Do you really know?" The shadows in the corner began to move, stretching and writhing like they were alive. Something was Ming there, a shape that hurt to look at directly. "You killed the Garretts," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They had Bell blood, distant, but it was there. Took me years to track them down, but I found them. Just like I found you." The shape was getting clearer now. Tall, impossibly thin, with eyes that glowed red in the darkness. It moved wrong, like its joints bent in directions they shouldn't. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. What John Bell stole from me when he drove me from my land. When he brought his God-fearing neighbors to burn my cabin and scatter my bones. Justice, boy. Every last drop of Bell blood spilled and gone." I fumbled for the tape recorder, hit record. There has to be another way, some kind of agreement. The thing that had been the Bell Witch laughed, and the sound made the cabin walls creak like they might collapse. "Your grandmother tried to make an agreement. Moved clear across 2 states, changed her name, raised her children to never speak of the old country. But blood calls to blood, and I got nothing but time." The temperature dropped even further. Ice was forming on the inside of the walls now, and my flashlight beam was getting dimmer despite the fresh batteries. "What about Emma? She's just a kid." "She's Bell blood. That's all that matters." Something slammed me against the wall. Not the invisible force from before, but actual claws. Long black talons that dug deep grooves in my back and left me gasping in pain. When I looked up, the witch was standing right in front of me, so close I could smell the grave dirt that clung to her. "Tomorrow," she hissed, "when the children come to play in my woods, I'll take the girl, and then I'll take you, and that'll be 2 more bells put right with the ground." I tried to move, tried to fight back, but those claws held me pinned like a bug in a collection. The witch leaned closer, her face a nightmare of rotted flesh and burning eyes. Unless what? You got Cherokee blood too, boy. Your daddy's side. That gives you power here on this mountain. You could make a trade. What kind of trade? But she was already fading, melting back into shadow and cold air. The cabin temperature started to return to normal, and my flashlight flickered back to life. On the wall where she'd held me, fresh scratches spelled out a message. Tomorrow at sunset. Come alone. I checked the tape recorder. 40 minutes of recorded time, but when I played it back, there was nothing but static and the sound of my own breathing. The scratches on my back were real, though, deep and infected looking, like they'd been made by something that had been rotting in the ground for a very long time. I barely slept Wednesday night. Every time I dozed off, I dreamed about Emma calling for help while something dark and terrible dragged her away into the woods. I woke up around 4 a.m. in a cold sweat, the scratches on my back burning like they were on fire. Thursday morning, Emma's field trip day, I called in sick to work. Spent the morning at the Cherokee reservation looking for answers I should have sought years ago. Old Charlie Crowfeather remembered my father. More importantly, he remembered the stories about the Bell Witch that went back long before John Bell ever set foot in Tennessee. She wasn't always a witch, Charlie told me over coffee in his kitchen. Used to be Cherokee, long time ago. Name was Tsikilili, means bird of night. She was a healer, a wise woman. But something happened, something bad. Her family was killed by white settlers moving west. And the grief drove her mad. What does that have to do with the Bells? John Bell wasn't just a farmer's son. He was one of the men who killed her family, burned her village. She cursed him with her dying breath, swore that his bloodline would never know peace. Charlie poured more coffee, his weathered hands steady despite his age. But the curse, it twisted her, made her into something. That ain't Cherokee anymore, ain't human anymore. Just hate and hunger, feeding on the pain of Bell descendants. How do I stop her? Can't stop her. But you can contain her, maybe. Bind her spirit to the mountain like our ancestors bound other evil things. Problem is, the binding has to be willing. And it has to be done by someone with both Cherokee blood and Bell blood. Someone like me. Someone exactly like you. But Jake, he leaned forward, his dark eyes serious. The binding ain't temporary. You make that choice, you're bound too. Your spirit stays on the mountain, guarding the curse until the end of time. I left the reservation with a leather pouch full of herbs and sage, along with instructions for a ritual I hoped I'd never have to use. But as the afternoon wore on, I knew I was running out of options. Emma's field trip was supposed to end at 4 p.m. By 4:30, when my phone hadn't rung, I started to worry. By 5, I was in my truck heading for Cades Cove. I found the school bus parked at the visitor center, engine running. The teacher was standing beside it, looking confused and frightened. Mr. Thornfield, thank God you're here. We can't find Emma. The story came out in pieces. The class had been exploring the restored cabins when Emma wandered off from the group. They'd been searching for over an hour, but it was like she'd just vanished. I knew where she was. The sun was setting as I approached the witch's cabin. The door stood open and I could hear Emma's voice from inside. Not screaming, but talking. Like she was having a conversation with someone. "Dad?" she called when she saw me. "Dad, there's the strangest old woman in here. She says she knows our family." Emma was sitting at the old wooden table, perfectly calm. But the temperature in the cabin was below freezing, and frost covered every surface. Sitting across from Emma was the witch, looking almost human in the dim light. "Hello, Jake," the witch said, her voice pleasant and grandmotherly. "Your daughter and I have been having such a nice chat. She's a lovely girl. She reminds me of myself at that age. Let her go. Your fight is with me." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong. My fight is with every Bell who draws breath. But you're right about one thing. I'll let the girl go. If you take her place." Emma looked confused. "Dad, what's she talking about? And why is it so cold in here?" I pulled the leather pouch from my pocket, started sprinkling the herbs Charlie had given me in a circle around myself. The witch's pleasant expression darkened. "Cherokee magic? How quaint. But you're too late for that, boy. The girl's already mine. That's when I noticed Emma's breath wasn't visible, even though the cabin was freezing. And when I looked closer, I could see through her just a little, like she was fading. What did you do to her? Same thing I did to the Garretts. Stopped her heart, pulled her spirit partway into my realm. She's got maybe 10 minutes before the crossing becomes permanent. The witch stood, and her pleasant human disguise melted away. 12 feet tall, covered in shadows that moved like living smoke, with eyes like burning coals. This was her true form, the thing that nightmares are made of. Make your choice, Jake Thornfield, your life for hers, or watch your daughter die slow and screaming in a place between the living and the dead. I looked at Emma, so young and confused, starting to realize something was terribly wrong. Then I looked at the pouch of herbs, at the ritual Charlie had taught me. There was a third option, but it would cost me everything. I began to chant in Cherokee, words my father had taught me when I was Emma's age. Words for binding, for sacrifice, for protecting the innocent. The witch shrieked, a sound like wind through a graveyard. You can't. The binding requires willing sacrifice from both bloodlines. I'm willing, I said, continuing the chant. The herbs in the circle began to smoke, and I felt power flowing through me. The power of my ancestors, of the mountain itself. Then you doom yourself for nothing. The girl still dies. But she was wrong. The Cherokee side of my heritage gave me power here, on this sacred mountain. And as I completed the ritual, I felt the witch's curse turning back on itself. Emma gasped, her breath suddenly visible again. Color returned to her face, and I knew her spirit had snapped back to the living world. Dad? Run, Emma. Get out of here and don't look back. She hesitated for just a moment, then ran for the door. Smart girl. She knew when to trust her father. The witch turned her full fury on me then, but it was too late. The binding was complete. I felt my own spirit starting to separate from my body, but unlike Emma's, mine was going willingly into the space between worlds. You've won nothing, the witch screamed as she began to fade. I'll be back. There are other Bell descendants, other bloodlines to follow. Maybe, I said, feeling strangely peaceful as the cabin dissolved around us. But you'll have to go through me first. Emma made it out of the woods and called for help. They found me in the cabin 3 hours later, sitting at the table with no pulse and no breath, but with a smile on my face like I'd finally found peace. The official report said heart attack, brought on by the stress of searching for my daughter. The cabin was sealed permanently after that. Too many unexplained deaths, the Park Service decided. Sometimes practical bureaucracy is the best defense against the supernatural. But I'm still here, in a way. Bound to this mountain, guardian against an ancient evil that sleeps fitfully in the spaces between the living world and whatever comes after. Emma grew up strong and smart, just like I knew she would. She became a park naturalist like she'd planned, though she specializes in the safer areas now, the touristy spots where families go to see waterfalls and wildlife. She can sense things others can't, a gift that came with surviving the witch's touch. Sometimes she visits the sealed cabin, stands at a distance, and talks to the wind. I can hear her, though I can't always answer. She married a good man, had children of her own. Beautiful kids with bright futures ahead of them. They carry the Bell bloodline, but they're protected now by something older and stronger than the witch's curse. The witch still stirs sometimes, especially when other Bell descendants venture too close to the mountain. I can feel her testing the boundaries of her prison, looking for cracks in the binding. But that's what I'm here for, to make sure those cracks never become breaks. Other rangers work the area now, and some of them have seen things they can't explain. Cold spots near the cabin, shadows that move wrong, equipment that fails for no good reason. They file reports that get buried in bureaucratic filing cabinets, and life goes on. But if you're listening to this story, if you're thinking about visiting the Great Smoky Mountains, let me give you some advice. Check your family tree first. Look back through the generations. See if any of your ancestors came from Tennessee in the early 1800s. If you find the name Bell anywhere in your lineage, maybe consider vacationing somewhere else. Some hatreds run deeper than death, older than memory. They follow bloodlines like rivers follow valleys. patient and persistent and hungry. The Bell Witch isn't the only such curse in these mountains. The Cherokee knew about things like this long before white settlers arrived with their own ghosts and grudges. Family curses are real, and they don't care how modern you think the world has become. They don't care about your education or your skepticism or your rational explanations for impossible things. They care about blood, about settling old scores, about hunger that never dies. So before you pack up the family for a camping trip to some historic site, before you rent that charming old cabin in the mountains, do yourself a favor. Know your history. Know your bloodline. Know what debts your ancestors might have left unpaid. Because somewhere in the darkness between the living world and whatever comes next, something might be waiting for you to come home, and it has nothing but time. My name is Elena Blackwater, and I've been a forest ranger for 15 years. I know these Blue Ridge Mountains like my own backyard. Every trail, every cave, every creek that runs through George Washington National Forest. I'm also a wildlife biologist. Big cats are my specialty. Mountain lions, bobcats, I've tracked them all. People always ask me about the Cherokee stories, the wampus cat legends, old tales about a woman cursed to be half human, half cat. I'd just smile and tell them it was probably a mountain lion someone saw in bad light. Folks love their ghost stories, especially out here in Virginia. Devil's Backbone Ridge sits about 3,200 feet up. It got its name for good reason. The rocky spine looks like something from hell when fog rolls in. People have been going missing up there since the 1800s. Usually hikers who wandered off trail. The mountains can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. I lived in a small cabin near the ranger station. Just me and my dog, Bear. He's a German shepherd, smart as they come. That Tuesday morning in October, Bear was acting strange, pacing around, whining at the door. The air felt heavy, like before a bad storm, but the sky was clear. My radio crackled to life at 6 a.m. Elena, we got a situation up on Devil's Backbone. 3 hikers found by the old Cherokee Trail. You need to get up there now. I grabbed my gear and headed out in my truck. The drive up the mountain road always calmed me. Pine trees, thick on both sides, leaves just starting to turn. But that morning felt different. The woods were too quiet. No birds singing. Even the insects had gone silent. When I reached the site, I saw the body bags. 3 of them. Sheriff Martinez looked pale. He'd seen plenty in his 20 years, but this had shaken him up. What happened? I asked. Something tore them apart, he said. Never seen anything like it. Take a look at the claw marks. I knelt down beside the evidence markers. Deep gouges in the trees, 4 parallel lines. But they were wrong somehow. Too big for a bobcat, wrong spacing for a bear. And there was something else. Bite marks that looked almost human mixed in with what seemed like cat teeth. Any tracks? I asked. Martinez pointed to the muddy ground near a creek. That's the weird part. Look at this. I followed his finger and felt my blood go cold. Paw prints, definitely feline, maybe 5 inches across. But 20 feet down the trail, they changed. The same stride pattern, but now they were handprints. Human handprints. Must be 2 different animals, I said. But even as I spoke, I didn't believe it. The smell hit me then. Sulfur and rot, like something had died weeks ago. But these bodies were fresh. The attack happened sometime during the night. Bear wouldn't go near the tracks. He stayed by the truck, ears flat against his head, a low growl in his throat. In all our years together, I'd never seen him scared of anything. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those tracks, how paw prints could become handprints in the same stride. It was impossible. I decided to go back up to Devil's Backbone in the morning with my trail cameras. Whatever killed those hikers might come back. I set up 6 cameras along the Cherokee Trail, spacing them about 100 yards apart. The batteries were fresh, memory cards empty. I'd done this hundreds of times, tracking mountain lions. By the time I finished, the sun was setting behind the mountains. Walking back to my truck, I heard it. A scream that made my skin crawl. High-pitched, almost like a woman in terrible pain. But there was something animal about it, too. It echoed off the ridges, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Bear was in the truck, and when he heard that sound, he started howling, not barking. Gee, howling like he was answering something wild. I drove home fast that night. The next morning, I checked my cameras. 4 of them were completely dead. Brand new batteries, drained, overnight. The other 2 had dozens of photos, but they were all black. Not dark, black like something had covered the lens. But the 6th camera, the one closest to where we found the bodies, had one image. Taken at 11:47 p.m. A woman stood in the trail, maybe 30 feet from the camera. She looked lost, wearing torn hiking clothes. Her hair was long and dark, hanging over her face. She was staring right at the camera, and her eyes reflected the flash like an animal's eyes would. I printed the photo and studied it. Something was wrong with her hands. They looked too long, fingers stretched out like claws. And her mouth, even with the poor image quality, I could see her teeth were too sharp, too many. I radioed the sheriff. "Martinez, I got something. That woman in the photo might be a witness, or maybe she's hurt. Can you run this through missing persons?" He called back 2 hours later. "Elena, that photo is Sarah Whitehorse. She went missing on Devil's Backbone 23 years ago. We found her body 3 days after she disappeared. She's buried in the Cherokee Cemetery." My hands shook as I held the photo. That's impossible. I'm looking at her file right now. Same face, same build. But Elena, Sarah was found torn apart by what we thought was a bear attack, just like those hikers yesterday. I stared at the photo again. The woman's eyes seemed to glow even in the printed image. And now that I looked closer, her feet weren't quite right either. Too narrow, like she was standing on her toes. That evening I was filing my report when Bear started going crazy outside, barking and snarling like something was trying to get in the house. I grabbed my flashlight and my rifle and went to the front porch. The yard was empty, but I could smell that sulfur stench again. Bear was looking up at the roof, hackles raised. I followed his gaze and nearly dropped my flashlights. HT, something was up there, crouched on the peak of my cabin. It looked like a woman, but she was too big, maybe 7 feet tall if she stood up. Her arms and legs were stretched out wrong, too long for a human body. And when my light hit her, she turned her head to look at me. It was the woman from the photo, Sarah Whitehorse. But her face was wrong now. Her mouth was full of cat teeth, long and sharp. Her eyes were gold and reflected my flashlight beam. She opened her mouth and made that screaming sound I'd heard on the mountain. I raised my rifle, but she moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. 1 second she was on my roof. The next she was gone. Just vanished into the darkness. Bear wouldn't calm down all night. He stayed pressed against my legs, shaking. Smart dog. He knew what I was just starting to understand. We were dealing with something that shouldn't exist. The next day I drove into town to talk to someone who might have answers. Thomas Crow Feather ran a small shop selling Cherokee crafts and artwork. He was in his 70s, a tribal elder who knew all the old stories. "Thomas, I need to ask you about the wampus cat." His face went serious. "Why?" I told him everything. The killings, the tracks, the photo, what I saw on my roof. He listened without interrupting, nodding slowly. "My grandmother told me about the wampus cat when I was a boy," he said. "Long time ago, a Cherokee woman wanted to know the secrets of the men's sacred rituals. She hid and watched ceremonies she wasn't supposed to see. The spirits caught her and cursed her. Half woman, half cat, forever hungry and angry." "Thomas, this is important. Is it real? Real as you and me? She comes back every 20 years or so when the mountains are disturbed, when people don't respect the sacred places." He looked at me hard. "She hunts those who violate the old boundaries. How do you stop hate? Arbor. You can't kill her with bullets or knives. She's already dead. But there are ways, Cherokee ways. You'd have to undergo the purification ritual, receive the blessing of the ancestors, but it's dangerous. If you fail, she'll tear you apart like all the others." That afternoon, 2 more hikers went missing on Devil's Backbone, a young couple from Richmond. Search and rescue found them the next morning, or what was left of them. Same claw marks, same bite patterns, and this time there were witnesses. "We saw her," the surviving hiker told me from his hospital bed. His name was Mike, and his girlfriend hadn't made it. He was scratched up bad, but alive. She looked like a regular person at first, asked if we needed help, said she knew a shortcut back to the parking area. What happened then? Jenny went with her. I had a bad feeling, so I stayed back. They walked maybe 50 yards, and then I heard Jenny scream. When I ran over, this thing was eating her. Half woman, half cat, big as a bear. It saw me and chased me for miles. I only got away by jumping in the creek. Mike grabbed my arm. It spoke to me, in English. Said I could join my girlfriend if I came back to the mountain. It knew my name. How did it know my name? That night, I made my decision. I called Thomas Crowfeather. I want to do the ritual. What do I need to know? You sure? This isn't something you do lightly. The wampus cat will know what you're planning. She'll try to stop you. She's killed 5 people in 3 days. I can't let her kill any more. Meet me at the old ceremonial cave tomorrow at sunset. Bring nothing but water and your courage. If the ancestors accept you, they'll protect you during the ritual. If they don't... He didn't finish that sentence. I spent the rest of the night writing letters. One to my sister in California explaining what happened in case I didn't make it. One to the sheriff telling him where to find my body if things went wrong. And one to my replacement, warning them about Devil's Backbone and the thing that hunted there. Bear seemed to understand something big was happening. He followed me around the house, whining softly. I knelt down and scratched his ears. Stay here, boy. This is something I have to do alone. The ceremonial cave was hidden deep in the forest, carved into the rock face of a steep cliff. Thomas was waiting for me with sage and other things I didn't recognize. The cave smelled of smoke and old rituals. Your great-great-grandmother was Cherokee, he said. Mary Blackwater. She married a white settler and left the tribe. You have Cherokee blood, which is why the ancestors might help you. But it's been diluted by generations. This ritual will awaken that connection, but it might kill you in the process. As he spoke, I heard that terrible scream echoing through the mountains. The wampus cat knew where we were. The ritual began at midnight. Thomas painted symbols on my face with clay and ash while chanting in Cherokee. The cave filled with smoke that made my head spin. I could hear voices in the smoke speaking in a language I didn't understand, but somehow knew. The ancestors are testing you, Thomas whispered. Show them your courage. Suddenly, I wasn't in the cave anymore. I was standing in a Cherokee village from long ago. Children played between wooden houses while women worked with clay pots. An old woman approached me, her face kind but serious. Elena Blackwater, great-great-granddaughter of Mary, she said in perfect English. You carry our blood, but do you carry our spirit? I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm trying to stop the killing. The wampus cat was once one of us. Her name was Running Deer. She loved a warrior who participated in the sacred rituals, and her love made her curious about things women were forbidden to know. When she was caught spying on the ceremonies, the punishment was transformation. She became trapped between human and animal, neither fully alive nor dead. The old woman touched my forehead. But there is more you must know. Running Deer was also your ancestor, your great-great-grandmother's sister. The wampus cat is your own blood. The vision faded, and I was back in the cave. But now I could see things I hadn't before. Spirits filled the shadows, Cherokee ancestors watching me with glowing eyes. And among them, I saw a face I recognized from old family photos. Mary Blackwater, my great-great-grandmother. The ritual is almost complete, Thomas said. But she's coming. The wampus cat will try to stop you before the ancestors can grant their protection. The cave entrance darkened. Something large blocked out the moonlight. I could hear claws scraping against stone, and that sulfur smell filled the air. She appeared in the entrance, crouching like a giant cat. In the firelight, I could see her clearly for the first time. She had the body of a woman, but stretched and distorted. Her arms were too long, ending in clawed hands. Her legs bent backward like a cat's hind legs, and her face, it was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Human features but with golden cat eyes and a mouth full of fangs. "Little Ranger," she spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "You think Cherokee magic can stop me? I am Cherokee magic. I am what happens when your people break their own laws." She moved into the cave, faster than anything natural. Thomas stepped between us, holding up a charm made of bone and feathers. The wampus cat hissed and backed away slightly. "She cannot enter while the ritual continues," he said. "But when it's finished, she'll be waiting." The spirits around me began to glow brighter. My great-great-grandmother stepped forward from among them. "Elena, child of two worlds," she said. "The curse can be broken, but only through sacrifice. One of Cherokee blood must offer their life freely to release Running Deer's spirit. She has been trapped in this form for over 200 years. I understood. The ritual wasn't meant to give me power to fight the wampus cat. It was meant to give me the ability to free her. "She's my family," I whispered. "Yes, and family protects family, even when it costs everything." The wampus cat heard this exchange. Her terrible features softened for just a moment, and I saw the woman she used to be. Scared, angry, but also tired. So very tired. "You would die for me?" she asked. "After I killed those people?" "You're not killing because you want to," I realized. "You're trapped. The hunger, the rage, they're part of the curse." She nodded slowly. "Every 20 years, it gets stronger. I can't control it anymore. I remember being human, but it feels like a dream." I stood up, facing her. The spirits around me hummed with energy. "Then let me help you remember." I stepped toward her, and she didn't attack. Instead, she shrank back, afraid. "I offer my life to break this curse," I said loudly, addressing the spirits in the cave. "Let Running Deer find peace." The cave filled with light. Wind from nowhere whipped through the chamber, and the wampus cat began to change. Her distorted body shifted, becoming smaller, more human. The claws retracted, the cat eyes faded to brown, and her face became that of a young Cherokee woman. But I felt something happening to me too. The Cherokee blood in my veins was awakening, connecting me to the spirits of my ancestors. I wasn't dying. I was transforming, becoming a bridge between the modern world and the ancient one. When the light faded, the woman who had been the wampus cat stood before me, fully human again. She looked exactly like the pictures I'd seen of Cherokee women from the 1800s, beautiful, proud, and finally at peace. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she faded away like morning mist. Running Deer had found her rest at last. Thomas helped me to my feet. I felt different, more aware of the forest around me, connected to something larger than myself. The ancestors. Spirits were still visible to me, watching from the shadows. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you carry the responsibility," he said. "The curse is broken, but the sacred places still need protection. You've become their guardian." We left the cave as the sun rose over the mountains. Devil's Backbone looked different in the morning light. Peaceful instead of threatening. The oppressive feeling that had hung over the ridge for weeks was gone. Back at the ranger station, I filed my report. Official cause of the deaths: attacks by an escaped exotic cat, now deceased. The truth would stay between me, Thomas, and the Cherokee spirits that watched over these mountains. But my work wasn't finished. Over the following months, I found myself drawn to other places in the forest where the old boundaries were being crossed. Developers wanting to build condos on sacred ground, hikers who carved their names into ancient trees, hunters who killed more than they needed. Nothing as dramatic as the wampus cat, but I could sense when the balance was being disturbed. Sometimes a stern warning was enough. Other times, I had to get creative. Equipment failures, getting people lost until they promised to respect the wilderness, making sure anyone who threatened the sacred places found their plans falling apart. Bear adapted to my new abilities quickly. He could sense the spirits too now, and he'd alert me when something was wrong in the forest. We made a good team. The Cherokee community accepted me in ways I'd never expected. Thomas introduced me to other elders, and they taught me about plants and animals, about reading the signs the forest gives to those who know how to look. I learned that my great-great-grandmother Mary hadn't abandoned her heritage when she married a white man. She'd been preparing for this moment, ensuring that someone with Cherokee blood would be here when the mountains needed protecting. 6 months after breaking the curse, I received a letter from a national magazine wanting to interview me about unusual animal attacks in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I threw it away. Some stories aren't meant for the outside world, but I'm telling you this story now because I want you to understand something important. The old places are still here, hidden in the forests and mountains. The spirits that watched over this land before Europeans arrived are still watching. They're not angry at progress or change, but they demand respect. If you go hiking in the deep woods, if you camp in the mountains, remember that you're a guest in a place that was sacred long before you were born. Don't take more than you need. Don't leave trash or carve your name in living trees. And if you hear something calling to you from the darkness, something that sounds almost human but not quite right, walk away. Some things are better left alone. My name is Elena Blackwater, and I guard the old places now. The Cherokee spirits trust me to keep the balance, to make sure that what happened with running deer never happens again. It's a responsibility I carry gladly, even though it means I'll never be completely normal again. The mountains are quiet now, but they're always watching, and so am I. My name is Roy Blackthorne, and I spent 19 years as a forest ranger in the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas. Before that, I tracked enemy soldiers through the jungles of Vietnam. I learned to read signs most people miss: broken twigs, disturbed earth, the way animals act when something's wrong. I never believed in Bigfoot stories. Not once. Every monster sighting I investigated turned out to be a bear, usually a big male looking for food. People see what they expect to see, especially when they're scared. That's what I always told the folks who came to me with wild tales about creatures in the woods. The Ouachitas are old mountains, worn down by millions of years of wind and rain. They're full of caves and hidden valleys where a person could get lost for weeks. The trees grow thick here, with pine and oak so dense that sunlight barely touches the forest floor. It's quiet in a way that makes city people nervous. Too quiet, they say. I lived alone in a small cabin near the ranger station, about 40 miles from the town of Fook. Most nights, the only sounds were owls hooting and the distant howl of coyotes. I liked it that way. After what I saw in the war, peace and quiet felt like a gift. That changed in October of 1987. I was drinking my morning coffee when the phone rang. It was Jake Morrison from Morrison Logging Company. His voice shook when he talked. "Roy, you need to get out here. Something's happened to our equipment. Something bad." "What kind of bad?" I asked. "Just come see for yourself. We're at the site on Ridge Road, about 15 miles past Miller's Creek." I drove out in my truck, expecting to find maybe a vandalized bulldozer or some environmental protesters who'd chained themselves to trees. What I found made me stop the truck and just stare. The logging equipment looked like it had been hit by a tornado. A 20-ton bulldozer was flipped upside down. The metal blade was twisted into a pretzel. Tree-cutting saws were scattered around the clearing like toys thrown by an angry child. Jake met me at the edge of the site. His face was white as paper. "Tell me this was some kind of machinery accident," he said. I walked around the wreckage, looking for clues. The damage was wrong in every way. Metal doesn't twist like that from normal forces. It takes massive pressure, applied in just the right spots. I'd seen similar damage from explosive charges in Vietnam, but there were no blast marks, no chemical smells. Then I saw the footprints. They were pressed deep into the hard-packed earth around the bulldozer. Each print was 22 inches long and 8 inches wide. They looked human, but no human foot was that big. The depth told me whatever made them weighed at least 800 pounds. "Jake," I said, "tell me exactly what your crew saw." He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. They were working late, trying to finish clearing this section before the weekend. Bobby Martinez was running the dozer when he heard something crashing through the trees. Something big. How big? He said it looked like a man, but 10 feet tall and covered in dark hair. It had glowing red eyes. When it saw the equipment, it went crazy. Started throwing the smaller machines around like they were made of cardboard. I knelt down next to one of the clearest footprints. The toes were distinct, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. Whatever made this print had intelligence. It had stepped carefully, placing its feet to get the best leverage for destroying the machinery. "Where's your crew now?" I asked. "Gone. They won't come back. Can't say I blame them." I spent the rest of the day taking measurements and photos. The more I studied the scene, the more confused I became. The destruction followed a pattern. Only the logging. Equipment was damaged. The crew's personal trucks were untouched. Even stranger, the creature had avoided damaging the trees themselves. As the sun started to set, I noticed something else. Scratch marks on the bark of the oldest oak trees, 12 feet off the ground. Long, parallel gouges that looked fresh. Something was marking its territory. I drove home that night with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Whatever had done this wasn't a bear. 3 days later, the phone rang again. This time it was Sheriff Davies from Polk County. "Roy, I need your tracking skills. We've got 5 construction workers missing from a job site near your area." The construction site was only 2 miles from where the logging equipment had been destroyed. The workers had been building a new road that would give the logging company easier access to the deep forest. Their equipment was undamaged, but their lunch truck was found overturned with all the food scattered on the ground. I studied the scene with Deputy Collins while Sheriff Davies coordinated with state police. The missing men's footprints led from their work area toward a ridge covered in thick pine trees. About 50 yards into the woods, the human tracks were joined by the same massive footprints I'd seen before. "What do you think, Roy?" Collins asked. "I think we need to follow this trail, but we need to be careful." The tracks led uphill through increasingly rough terrain. After an hour of climbing, we found something that made my blood run cold. A work boot, torn and bloody, hanging from a tree branch 15 feet off the ground. Collins radioed for backup, but I kept following the trail. The creature prints were deeper now, pressed into the soft earth with more weight. Whatever had taken those men was carrying them. The trail led to a limestone cliff face with several cave openings. The stench hit us before we saw the caves. A mix of rotting meat and animal musk so strong it made my eyes water. "We should wait for backup," Collins said. "Those men might still be alive," I replied, though I didn't believe it. I took my flashlight and service pistol and entered the largest cave. The smell got worse as I went deeper. The cave walls were covered with more scratch marks and the floor was littered with bones. Not just animal bones. Some looked human. I heard a sound behind me and spun around. Collins was backing toward the cave entrance, his face twisted with fear. "Roy," he whispered, "we're not alone in here." From deeper in the cave came a low, growling sound like nothing I'd ever heard. It started as a rumble but rose to an almost human moan. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. One of the missing men calling for help. "Help me! Please, somebody help me!" The voice came from the back of the cave, but something was wrong with it. It sounded flat, like someone poorly imitating human speech. I moved toward the sound, flashlight beam dancing on the cave walls. The calling stopped suddenly, replaced by a different sound, heavy breathing that echoed off the stone. Then I saw them. 2 glowing red dots about 8 feet off the ground, watching me from the darkness. As I raised my flashlight, the creature stepped into the light. It was like Jake's crew had described, but worse. 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair with arms that hung almost to the ground. But the face was the worst part. It looked almost human, but the features were stretched and distorted. The eyes held intelligence, cold, calculating intelligence. The creature opened its mouth and spoke in perfect imitation of the construction worker's voice. "Help me! Please, somebody help me!" I raised my pistol, but before I could fire, the creature moved with impossible speed. It swatted the gun from my hand and grabbed me by the shirt, lifting me off the ground like I weighed nothing. Collins screamed from behind me. I heard his boots slipping on the cave floor as he ran for the enceinte. Trance. The creature held me close to its face. Its breath was hot and rank. Then it did something that haunts me to this day. It smiled. Not a human smile, but something that showed it. Understood exactly how terrified I was. It set me down gently, almost carefully, then pointed toward the cave entrance. The message was clear: leave now, or don't leave at all. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the creature. When I reached the entrance, Collins grabbed my arm and pulled me into the sunlight. We ran down that mountain faster than either of us had run since high school. The backup team found the bodies of all 5 construction workers in a smaller cave about 100 yards from where I'd encountered the creature. They'd been dead for at least 2 days. Word got out despite Sheriff Davies' attempts to keep things quiet. Within a week, the area was crawling with reporters, curiosity seekers, and self-proclaimed monster hunters. The state brought in experts from the university to study the scene. Dr. Sarah Chen, an anthropologist from Little Rock, examined the cave and the surrounding area. She found me at the ranger station 3 days after her team arrived. "Mr. Blackthorne, I need to ask you about what you saw in that cave." "I filed a report with the sheriff. It's all there. Your report describes a large, unidentified animal, but the evidence suggests something else entirely." She spread photos across my desk, close-ups of the scratch marks, measurements of the footprints, pictures of bones arranged in patterns inside the cave. "These bones weren't just discarded after feeding," she said. "They were arranged deliberately. That suggests ritual behavior, intelligence." "What are you saying, Doc?" "I'm saying we might be dealing with an unknown species of primate, something that's evolved separately from humans but developed similar cognitive abilities." Before I could respond, we heard shouting outside. Through the window, I saw a group of college kids running toward the station, terror written on their faces. The leader, a young man with a backpack and camping gear, burst through the door. "Something attacked our campsite. It threw our tent into the trees. My girlfriend is missing." Dr. Chen and I exchanged glances. "Where?" I asked. "About 2 miles up Trail 7. We were just taking pictures of the cave where those workers died when we heard this awful roaring sound." I grabbed my rifle and radio. "Doc, call Sheriff Davies. Tell him we need a search team." "I'm coming with you," she said. "This isn't a research expedition anymore." "That's exactly why I need to come. If we're right about what this is, you're going to need someone who understands primate behavior." We drove to Trail 7 with the 3 college students. Their campsite looked like the logging equipment had, completely destroyed. The tent was indeed hanging from a tree, 40 feet off the ground. Camping gear was scattered everywhere, but like before, nothing was actually stolen or eaten. "It's territorial behavior," Dr. Chen whispered, "displaying dominance without actually harming the intruders." "Tell that to the missing girl," I said. We found her tracks leading toward a different set of caves, higher up on the ridge. But this time the creature tracks were different, smaller. There were also tracks from what looked like juvenile specimens. "My God," Dr. Chen said. "It's a family group." As we followed the trail, I began to hear sounds that made my hair stand up. Low hooting calls echoing from different directions around us. They were communicating, coordinating. The missing girl, Lisa, was sitting unharmed outside a cave entrance about a mile from the campsite. When she saw us, she started crying with relief. "They didn't hurt me," she sobbed. "They just watched me, like they were trying to figure out what I was." As we helped her to her feet, I noticed we were being observed. Red eyes glowed from the shadows between the 2, Reese. Not just one pair, dozens. "We need to leave," I said quietly. "Now." Dr. Chen was staring into the forest, fascinated. "Roy, do you realize what this means? We've discovered an entire population of unknown hominids. What this means is we're surrounded by creatures that could tear us apart anytime they want to." The hooting calls grew louder, coming from all sides now. I could see movement in the trees. large shapes swinging from branch to branch with the agility of giant apes. Then the largest one I'd seen yet stepped out of the tree line. This one was at least 12 feet tall, with broader shoulders and longer arms than the female I'd encountered in the cave. Its hair was graying around the face, and old scars marked its chest and arms. This was the leader of the pack. It looked directly at me and spoke in a voice that was almost human. "Leave. Now." The words were clear, unmistakable. Dr. Chen gasped. The college students huddled together in terror. "We're leaving," I said, raising my hands to show I wasn't a threat. "We don't want to hurt you or your family." The big male tilted its head, studying me. Then it made a gesture with one massive hand, a clear indication that we should go back the way we came. We walked slowly down the trail, the creatures following us at a distance. I could feel their eyes on us every step of the way. They were making sure we left their territory. When we reached the vehicles, Dr. Chen grabbed my arm. "Roy, we have to study them. This is the most important anthropological discovery in history." "Doc, those things just let us live. I'm not going to push our luck." But I knew this was far from over. The creatures were intelligent, organized, and growing more aggressive as their territory was invaded. And with reporters and thrill-seekers flooding the area, it was only a matter of time before someone did something stupid enough to start a war. I was right about the war coming sooner than expected. 2 days later, a group of hunters from Texas arrived with high-powered rifles and military-grade night vision equipment. They'd seen the news reports and decided they were going to bag themselves a Bigfoot. I tried to stop them at the ranger station. "Gentlemen, that area is closed to hunting, for your own safety." The leader, a big man named Wade Thompson, laughed. "Ranger, we've hunted grizzly bears in Alaska and Cape Buffalo in Africa. We can handle some overgrown ape." "These aren't animals," I tried to explain. "They're intelligent, they're organized, and they're protecting their families. Even better, smart game is more challenging." They went up the mountain that afternoon despite my warnings. I radioed Sheriff Davies, but he was dealing with 3 other groups of amateur monster hunters who'd arrived that same day. Around midnight, I heard gunshots echoing from the ridge. Lots of them. Then screaming. I grabbed my gear and called for backup, but I couldn't wait. Those idiots might have just declared war on creatures that had been showing remarkable restraint. I drove as far as the trail would allow, then hiked the rest of the way by flashlight. The hunters' camp was empty when I arrived. Their expensive equipment was scattered around, and there were signs of a struggle. Then I heard Wade Thompson calling for help from somewhere up the mountain. But like before, something was wrong with the voice. It was too flat, too practiced. I followed the sound anyway. What else could I do? The voice led me to a clearing I'd never seen before, despite 19 years in these mountains. Ancient trees formed a perfect circle around a flat area covered in soft moss. In the center stood the big male I'd encountered before. He wasn't alone. At least 20 creatures surrounded the clearing, adults, juveniles, and what might have been elderly members of their species. They all watched me with those glowing red eyes as I stepped into the circle. The alpha male spoke in Thompson's voice. "Help. Me, please, somebody help me." Then, in his own voice, deeper and more resonant, "Your people hunt us, kill our children, destroy our home." I raised my hands, showing I was unarmed. "I'm not here to hunt you. I'm here to help." "Why should we trust you?" "Because I've had chances to bring others up here. Scientists, military, people with weapons. I haven't done it." The big male studied me for a long moment. Then he stepped aside, revealing what was behind him. Wade Thompson and his hunting party sat against a fallen log, unharmed, but clearly terrified. Their expensive rifles were piled in a neat stack nearby, bent into useless metal shapes. "We could have killed them," the alpha male said. "Should have killed them. But you showed us respect, so we show mercy." "Thank you," I said. "But no more hunters. No more machines cutting our forest. No more people taking our food." I understood. The logging, the construction, the constant stream of curiosity seekers. It was all pushing them toward a breaking point. "What do you want me to do?" The creature pointed at Thompson and his men. Tell them what happens to those who hunt us. Tell all your people. I will. And you, tracker from the war, you will watch the borders. Keep your people away from our places. It wasn't really a request. It was an assignment. I'll do what I can, I said. The alpha male nodded. Then he made a gesture, and the other creatures began to fade back into the forest. Within moments, only he and I remained in the clearing with the terrified hunters. Your people have words for us. Monster. Beast. We have words for your people too. He paused, those intelligent eyes fixed on mine. But you are different. You see us as we are. What are you? I asked. We are what you might have become if you had chosen the forest over the fire. Then he too disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone with 5 shaken hunters who would spend the rest of their lives telling a story no one would believe. That was 37 years ago. I took early retirement from the Forest Service within a mere years of that night. Officially, I cited health concerns. Unofficially, I'd found a new job. The creatures kept their word. There were no more attacks on humans, no more destroyed equipment. The logging company found environmental concerns that made their project economically unfeasible. The construction crews discovered geological problems that made road building impossible. I made sure of it. Over the years, I developed a network of understanding. Park rangers who would reroute hiking trails, local authorities who would issue warnings about dangerous wildlife in certain areas. Even some reporters who agreed to keep the story quiet in exchange for occasional background information. Dr. Chen tried for years to get permission to study them properly, but the funding never came through. Funny how government grants can get lost in bureaucratic red tape when the right person makes the right phone calls. I built observation posts at key locations around their territory. Not to spy on them, but to watch for intruders. Over the decades, I've turned away dozens of hunters, researchers, and thrill seekers. Most listen to reason. A few need to be convinced more firmly. The creatures and I have developed a mutual understanding. They stay hidden. I keep their secret. Occasionally, I'll find gifts left at the edge of their territory, unusual stones, carved pieces of wood, sometimes food I can't identify but that tastes better than anything from town. I've seen their children grow up, watched new generations learn to avoid human contact. They've adapted to the modern world in ways that amaze me. They know about helicopters, cell phone towers, satellite imagery. They've learned to hide from technology as well as they hide from people. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if the world knew the truth. Would they be protected as an endangered species, studied as the missing link, or would they be hunted to extinction by people who can't accept that we're not alone on this planet? I'm 86 now. My joints ache in cold weather, and I can't hike the mountain trails like I used to. The creatures know I'm getting old. They've started watching me as carefully as I've watched them. Last week I found something new at one of my observation posts. A young man's backpack, torn and bloody, but no sign of the owner. For a moment, I feared the worst, that the treaty I'd helped establish was breaking down. Then I saw the note, written in careful block letters on a piece of bark. Safe. Will return when ready. Thank you for teaching us your words. They're still learning, still adapting, still surviving in a world that would destroy them if it knew they existed. I've trained my replacement, though he doesn't know it yet. Jake Morrison's grandson, a young ranger named David, who has his grandfather's respect for the forest and his great-grandfather's ability to keep secrets. He's already noticed the unusual wildlife patterns in my sector. Soon, I'll have to tell him the truth, because someone has to keep watching. Someone has to stand between two worlds that can never safely meet. My name is Roy Blackthorne, and I've spent the last 37 years protecting a secret that could change everything we think we know about ourselves. I'm not the only one keeping watch. Sometimes on quiet nights when the moon is dark and the forest is still, I can feel those red eyes watching me back, making sure I keep my word, making sure their children stay safe. The Fook monster's kin are still out there, and they're counting on us to pretend they're not. My name is Marcus Ironside, and I've been a forest ranger for 14 years. People always think our job is just hiking around looking at trees, maybe fighting the odd wildfire. They don't know about the nights. The real work happens when the sun goes down and the forest changes into something else entirely. I patrol the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, up on the Appalachian Plateau where the trees grow thick and the mountains stretch like sleeping giants. At 2,800 feet up, the air gets thin and the sounds carry different. I know every trail, every creek, every cave in my territory. Or at least I thought I did. Before 1979, I was the kind of man who believed in facts. Every animal had a name, a classification, a behavior pattern you could predict. Black bears, mountain lions, coyotes. I knew them all. I'd seen deer with their throats torn out by wild dogs, cattle killed by lightning strikes, even a few bear attacks on campers who didn't secure their food properly. Nature could be brutal, but it always made sense. That October started normal enough. The leaves were turning, painting the mountains in reds and golds that took your breath away. Tourists came up from Charlotte and Asheville to take pictures, most of them in groups, chattering loud enough to scare away anything interesting. I preferred the quiet times between their visits, when the forest felt like it belonged to itself again. I'd married Sarah 3 years back, and she worried about my night shifts. "Why can't you patrol during the day like a normal person?" she'd ask, packing my thermos with coffee that would be cold by midnight. I'd explain about poachers, about how the real trouble started after dark, but she never seemed convinced. Maybe she was picking up on something I couldn't see yet. My radio crackled that Tuesday evening as I checked my equipment. "Marcus, you there?" It was Bill Pat Turson, the day shift supervisor. "Right here, Bill. What's the word?" "Got a call from Jimmy Morrison up on Sunset Ridge. Says something killed 3 of his calves last night. Wants a ranger to take a look." I knew Jimmy. Good farmer. Been working that land for 20 years. Not the type to call unless something was genuinely wrong. "Any idea what got them?" He wouldn't say over the phone. Just kept asking if we'd had reports of big cats in the area. Mountain lions weren't common in our part of North Carolina, but they weren't impossible either. I'd seen tracks a few times over the years, though never the animals themselves. They were smart enough to avoid humans, usually. "I'll head up there now," I told Bill. "Should be back by dawn." Sarah kissed me goodbye at the door, same as always, but this time she held on a little longer. "Be careful out there," she whispered, and I felt something cold touch the back of my neck. The drive to Jimmy's farm took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. My truck's headlights swept across pine trees and rock formations that looked like crouching animals in the darkness. The radio played country music, but static kept cutting through the signal. Up this high, you learn not to rely too much on technology. Jimmy met me at his gate with a flashlight and a grim expression. He was a big man, hands like leather from years of outdoor work, but tonight he looked shaken. "Thanks for coming out, Marcus. I've been farming these mountains my whole life, and I ain't never seen anything like this." We walked across his pasture, our flashlight beams dancing ahead of us. The calves lay in a rough triangle, maybe 30 feet apart from each other. At first glance, it looked like any other predator attack, except for the complete lack of blood. "Jesus," I breathed, kneeling beside the first calf. It was a young Holstein, probably 8 months, old. Its black and white hide looked perfectly normal, but when I touched it, the skin felt like leather left in the desert. "How long have they been dead?" "Found them this morning around 6. They were fine when I checked on them yesterday evening." I examined each calf carefully the way I'd been trained. No claw marks, no bite wounds on the throat or belly, no signs of a struggle. But something had drained every drop of blood from their bodies, leaving them looking like deflated balloons. "Jimmy, you ever see anything like this before?" He shook his head, wrapping his jacket tighter around himself. "My granddad used to tell stories about things in these mountains, things that didn't have names, but I never believed." He trailed off, looking at the dead calves. That's when I found the tracks. The prints were unlike anything in my 14 years of experience. Paw-shaped, but massive, easily 6 inches long and 4 inches wide. 4 toes with what looked like retractable claw marks, similar to a cat, but the size was all wrong. The biggest mountain lion I'd ever tracked left prints maybe 3.5 inches long. These belonged to something twice that size. "Jimmy, get your camera," I said, pulling out my measuring tape. "We need to document this." But when Jimmy returned with his old Polaroid, something strange happened. The first photo came out completely black. The second showed nothing but white light. The third was so blurred you couldn't make out shapes. "This camera worked fine yesterday," Jimmy muttered, shaking another useless photo. "Took pictures of my new tractor." I tried my own camera, a reliable Nikon I'd used for wildlife documentation for years. Same result: black frames, white flashes, impossible blur. The equipment was fine, but somehow couldn't capture what we were looking at. "Let me make some plaster casts," I said, unpacking my field kit. At least those would be physical evidence. The plaster poured normally, but when I returned an hour later to collect the molds, they'd cracked into pieces. Every single one looked like something had deliberately destroyed them. I spent the rest of the night examining the scene with my flashlight and notebook, sketching the prints by hand, measuring distances, looking for any physical evidence that might explain what had happened. The tracks led from the forest edge straight to the dead calves, then disappeared into the woods on the other side of the pasture. But here's what bothered me. There were only tracks approaching the calves, none leaving. It was like whatever killed them had simply vanished. "I'll file a report with the wildlife department," I told Jimmy as dawn broke. "Probably a big cat passing through. Mountain lions can jump pretty far, might explain why there aren't tracks leading away." But I didn't believe my own explanation, and Jimmy's skeptical look told me he didn't either. Over the next week, 3 more farms reported similar attacks. Always the same pattern. Livestock found completely drained of blood with no visible wounds, massive paw prints that couldn't be photographed, and that eerie lack of exit tracks. I started doing extra patrols, spending my nights driving the mountain roads and hiking the trails with my flashlight and radio. Sarah complained about me being gone so much, but I couldn't explain the feeling that something was watching the forest, something that didn't belong in any field guide or wildlife manual. That Friday night, I got my first real glimpse of it. I was checking the area around Jimmy's farm, following a deer trail that wound between thick oak trees. The moon was new, making the darkness complete except for my flashlight beam. That's when I heard the sound. A low rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, but something in between that made the hair on my arms stand up. I stopped walking and listened. The normal forest sounds, owls, insects, wind through, H-leaves, had gone completely silent. Even my own breathing seemed too loud. Then I saw the eyes. 2 yellow lights, maybe 6 feet off the ground, watching me from about 50 feet away. They didn't reflect my flashlight beam the way normal animal eyes would. Instead, they seemed to glow with their own inner light, like tiny suns burning in the darkness. I've encountered bears, wild cats, even a few aggressive wild boars in my time as a ranger. You learn to stay calm, make yourself look bigger, back away slowly. But these eyes paralyzed me. I couldn't move, couldn't look away, could barely breathe. The creature stepped forward just enough for me to see its outline. It was massive, easily 6 feet long, not counting the tail. The body shape was definitely feline, but built heavier than any mountain lion. Its shoulders were broad like a bear's, and when it moved, there was no sound at all. Not a footstep, not a rustled leaf. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then my radio crackled with static, breaking the spell. When I looked down for just an instant to adjust the volume, the eyes vanished. I swept my flashlight across the trees, calling out, "Hey! Hey!" like an idiot, but there was nothing. The forest sounds gradually returned. A barn owl calling, branches creaking in the wind, the distant howl of a coyote. But as I walked back to my truck, I could feel something following me. Not close enough to see, but there, matching my pace through the trees parallel to the trail. Every few steps I'd stop and listen, but the footsteps would stop too. When I moved, it moved. It followed me all the way to the parking area. The next morning, I found tracks around my truck, The same massive paw prints, circling the vehicle like the creature had been inspecting it. But when I tried to photograph them, my camera malfunctioned again. The images came out as solid black rectangles. I drove straight to the library in Asheville and spent the day researching large cats native to North Carolina. Mountain lions, sure, but they'd be, and mostly hunted out of the region by the 1900s. A few scattered sightings over the years, but nothing confirmed. Definitely nothing big enough to leave 6-inch paw prints. Then I found the historical records. The Cherokee called it the Klandaji, the shadow cat. According to tribal stories dating back hundreds of years, it was a guardian spirit that protected the mountain forests from those who would harm them. The accounts described a massive black panther that could disappear at will and fed on the life force of its victims rather than their flesh. But these were just stories, right? Folklore passed down through generations, probably based on glimpses of regular mountain lions blown out of proportion. That's what I told myself until Bobby Henshaw turned up dead. Bobby was a local poacher, the kind of guy who'd shoot anything that moved if he thought he could sell it. I'd caught him hunting illegally twice in the past year, but he always managed to slip away before I could arrest him. Everyone knew he had spotlights and traps hidden throughout the forest, taking deer out of season and probably selling the meat to restaurants down in Charlotte. A hiker found Bobby's body on Sunday morning, about 2 miles from where I'd seen those glowing eyes. He was lying beside his disabled pickup truck, rifle still in his hands, looking like he'd died of fright. But when the county coroner examined him, they found the same thing we'd seen with the livestock. Bobby Henshaw had been completely drained of blood. Sheriff Davidson called me to the scene since it was on federal land. Ever see anything like this, Marcus? Bobby's body looked exactly like those calves, skin pale and leathery, but no visible wounds except for 2 small puncture marks on his neck. They were spaced about 3 inches apart, like fangs, but too large for any snake native to the area. Could be some kind of exotic pet that got loose, I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. Maybe someone was keeping an illegal animal that escaped. Davidson nodded, but his expression said he wasn't buying it either. Bobby's truck is interesting, he said, leading me over to examine the vehicle. The pickup looked like it had been attacked by a tornado. All 4 tires were shredded, but not by bullets or knives, by claws. Long scratches gouged through the metal of the doors and hood, too deep and too wide for any normal animal. The windshield was spider-webbed, as if something incredibly heavy had landed on it. But the strangest thing was Bobby's rifle. It was an expensive hunting rifle with a powerful scope, the kind serious poachers used for long-distance shots. The barrel had been twisted into a corkscrew shape, as if something with incredible strength had simply grabbed it and wrung it out like a wet towel. "What kind of animal has that much strength?" Davidson asked. I didn't have an answer. That night, I called in sick and went into the forest alone. I'd been thinking about those Cherokee stories, about the idea of a guardian spirit that punished people who harmed the wilderness. Bobby Henshaw had been killing deer illegally for years. What if something had finally decided to stop him? I parked at the same spot where I'd seen the glowing eyes and hiked deeper into the forest than I'd ever gone before. No flashlight this time. I wanted to see if the creature would approach me in complete darkness. After about an hour of walking, I found myself in a small clearing surrounded by ancient oak trees. The place felt different somehow, older and more alive than the rest of the forest. Moonlight filtered through the leaves, creating patterns on the ground that seemed to shift and move. That's when I heard the voice. Not speaking out loud, but inside my head, like someone was whispering directly into my thoughts. "You seek the shadow cat." I spun around, heart hammering, but saw nothing. "Who's there?" "You are the one who protects this forest," the voice continued. And it was neither male nor female, but something ancient and wild. "Yet you do not understand what you protect it from." Then I saw it clearly for the first time. The creature stepped out from behind one of the massive oak trees, and it was even larger than I'd thought. It had to weigh at least 400 pounds, with muscles that rippled under its coal-black fur. The head was distinctly feline, but broader than a mountain lion's, with ears that ended in small tufts like a lynx. Its tail was thick and powerful, easily 4 feet long. But the eyes were what held my attention. They glowed with that same inner light I'd seen before, but now I could see intelligence in them. This wasn't just an animal. It was something far more complex. "Don't be afraid," the voice said in my mind. "I have been watching you. You care for this place as I do." I found my voice. "What are you?" "I am what your people call the Klandaji, the shadow cat. I have guarded these mountains since before your kind built their first villages in the valleys below." The creature began to pace around me in a slow circle, never taking those burning yellow eyes off my face. "For centuries, I have maintained the balance. When humans took only what they needed, I let them pass. But some take more than their share. Some kill for pleasure or for profit, with no thought for the consequences. Like Bobby Henshaw. Bobby Henshaw was a poison in this forest. He killed mother deer and left fawns to starve. He took more animals in one season than a pack of wolves would take in a year. The forest was dying because of men like him. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The creature's presence was overwhelming, like standing next to a powerful electrical generator. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy. "But you're killing people," I managed to say. "I am removing those who upset the balance, just as a surgeon removes cancer to save the patient." The shadow cat completed its circle and sat back on its haunches, studying me. "Tell me, Marcus Ironside, what is the life of one poacher worth? Compared to the lives of 1,000 deer, what is the greed of one man worth compared to the health of an entire forest?" I didn't have an answer for that. "You have a choice to make," the creature continued, its voice echoing in my skull. "You can try to hunt me as others have tried over the centuries. You can bring your guns and your traps and your dogs, and you will fail as they all failed. Or what? Or you can help me protect what we both love." The forest around us seemed to pulse with life. I could hear every creature within miles, the heartbeat of a sleeping rabbit, the breathing of deer in their beds, the slow growth of tree roots deep in the earth. It was like the shadow cat was sharing its senses with me, showing me the forest as it really was. Not just trees and animals, but a living system connected in ways I'd never imagined. "How?" I asked. "Accept my gift. Become my partner in maintaining the balance." The creature rose and approached me. Up close, I could see that its fur wasn't just black. It seemed to absorb light, creating a darkness so complete it hurt to look at directly. When it breathed, the air shimmered like heat waves. "If I refuse? Then you will leave this place and never return, and the balance will be maintained without you." I thought about Sarah, about my life as a normal forest ranger, about the predictable world of facts and classifications I'd lived in for 34 years. Then I thought about the forest, about poachers like Bobby Henshaw, about the industrial development creeping up the mountains, about everything that threatened this wild place I'd sworn to protect. What does accepting your gift mean? You will gain abilities beyond human understanding, enhanced senses, the power to move unseen through the forest, knowledge of every creature and plant within 100 miles. But you will also share my burden. You will help me judge those who threaten our domain. Judge them how? The shadow cat's eyes flared brighter. Those who hunt legally, who take only what they need and respect the forest's laws, will be left alone. Those who destroy and kill for profit or pleasure. It showed its teeth, massive fangs that gleamed like ivory daggers. They will face justice. I realized I was at a crossroads that would define the rest of my life. Everything I'd been trained to believe told me to refuse, to run, to call for backup and try to capture or kill this impossible creature. But everything I felt in my heart told me the shadow cat was right. The forest needed protection that went beyond human laws and regulations. If I agree, what happens to my life? My wife? You will continue as you have. The gift works through your human life, enhancing it rather than replacing it. But you will carry secrets that you can never share. I looked around the clearing one more time, at the ancient trees that had stood here for centuries, at the rich darkness that hid so much life. Then I made my choice. I accept. The shadow cat moved closer until its massive head was inches from my face. Its breath was warm and smelled like pine needles and wild honey. Then received the gift of the Klendagi. It touched its forehead to mine, and the world exploded. Power flowed through me like lightning, reshaping every cell in my body. I could suddenly hear the conversations of owls miles away, smell the fierce scent of a rabbit hiding under a log, feel the heartbeat of every living thing in the forest. My vision sharpened until I could see individual leaves on trees hundreds of yards away, even in the darkness. But with the enhanced senses came something else, a deep, ancient knowledge of the forest's history. I saw centuries of human encroachment, of forests cut down and animals slaughtered, of the slow retreat of wildness before the advance of civilization. I understood why the shadow cat had chosen to act, and why it needed a human partner to help maintain the balance. When the transformation was complete, I felt like I'd been reborn. My body was still human, but enhanced in ways that defied explanation. I could move through the forest without making a sound, see in complete darkness, track any animal by scent alone. "Now you understand," the creature said, its voice gentler now. "We are partners in protecting what cannot protect itself." I spent the rest of the night learning to use my new abilities, following the shadow cat through territories I'd thought I knew, but had never really seen. We moved like ghosts through the darkness, checking on deer herds and bear dens, monitoring the health of streams and plant communities, making sure the balance was maintained. As dawn approached, the shadow cat led me back to the clearing where we'd made our pact. "Your real work begins now," it told me. "The poachers and destroyers will sense something has changed, but they will not know what. Use your position as a ranger to guide them away from the most sensitive areas. But if they persist in harming what we protect, I understand. Do you? Taking a life is not easy, even when justice demands it. You will struggle with decisions that have no perfect answers." I thought about Bobby Henshaw, about the deer he'd killed and the fawns he'd left to starve. Some decisions are clearer than others. The shadow cat studied me for a long moment. "Perhaps. Time will tell what kind of guardian you become." As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees, the creature started to fade, becoming translucent, like mist. "Where do you go during the day?" "I exist between worlds," it said, its voice growing distant. "In the daylight, I sleep in the spaces between shadows. But when darkness falls, I will be watching. And now, so will you." Then it was gone, leaving me alone in the clearing with the morning birds beginning to sing. I walked back to my truck as the sun rose over the Appalachian plateau, feeling like a different person than the one who'd entered the forest the night before. My enhanced senses were overwhelming at first, every sound magnified, every scent carrying detailed information I'd never noticed before. I could hear Sarah making breakfast 15 miles away in our kitchen, smell the coffee she was brewing, even sense her worry about my absence. The drive home gave me time to think about what I'd become and what it meant for my life. How do you explain to your wife that you've made a pact with a supernatural creature? How do you continue working as a forest ranger when you now possess abilities that no human should have? Sarah was waiting at the kitchen table when I walked in, still in her bathrobe, hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "You were gone all night," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. Working a case, the Bobby Henshaw thing. She studied my face with the intensity that comes from 3 years of marriage. "You look different." "Different how?" "I don't know, more alert, I guess. Like you're seeing things I can't see." She was more perceptive than I'd given her credit for. "It's been a strange week." "Are you in danger out there? Really in danger, not just the normal ranger stuff?" I wanted to lie to her, to maintain the comfortable fiction that I was still just a normal forest ranger dealing with normal problems. But looking into her eyes, I realized she deserved at least part of the truth. "There's something in the forest," I said carefully. "Something that's been killing poachers and livestock. It's not like anything I've encountered before." "What kind of something?" "I'm not sure yet, but I don't think it's going to hurt innocent people." That seemed to satisfy her for the moment, though I could tell she sensed there was more to the story. Sarah had always been good at reading between the lines. Over the following weeks, word spread through the mountain communities about the beast that had killed Bobby Henshaw. Poaching incidents dropped dramatically as hunters decided to stick to legal game during legal seasons. The few who didn't heed the warning, well, they learned that some rules were enforced by powers beyond human law. I helped where I could, using my enhanced abilities to track illegal hunters and guide them away from protected areas. Most took the hint. A few didn't. Those few encountered the shadow cat, and their stories, assuming they survived to tell them, became part of the growing legend. My work as a ranger became incredibly effective. I could track any animal, predict weather patterns days in advance, and locate lost hikers with supernatural accuracy. My supervisors noticed the improvement but attributed it to experience and dedication. They had no way to guess the real reason. Federal wildlife investigators came through twice in the first year, trying to identify the creature responsible for the unusual deaths. I deflected their inquiries, filed misleading reports, and used my position to protect the shadow cat's secret. They eventually concluded that a large mountain lion was passing through the area and moved on to other cases. The years passed, and I settled into my dual role as forest ranger and supernatural guardian. The partnership with the shadow cat deepened over time. We developed an understanding that went beyond words, a shared commitment to protecting the wilderness that had become the center of both our existences. I aged normally, but my enhanced abilities remained constant. At 40, I could still track a deer through miles of forest using nothing but scent. At 50, I could still see in complete darkness and move through the woods without making a sound. The gift came with longevity, it seemed, or at least the promise of many years of service. Sarah never asked directly about the changes in me, but I knew she suspected something extraordinary had happened too. At night in 1979, she supported my work without question, even when it meant long absences and mysterious phone calls. Perhaps she understood on some level that I was fighting for something more important than myself. The forest thrived under our protection. Deer populations stabilized, bear sightings increased, and rare plant species that had been nearly extinct began to recover. Poaching became almost non-existent in our territory, as stories of the shadow cat spread throughout the region and beyond. But the real victory was in the subtler changes. Developers who had planned to build on protected land found their permits mysteriously delayed or denied. Logging companies discovered that their equipment malfunctioned whenever they got too close to old-growth forests. Industrial polluters learned that their activities in the mountains came with unexpected consequences. The shadow cat and I became legends ourselves, though we were careful to remain invisible. Park rangers in other states began reporting similar phenomena, mysterious protectors that seemed to guard wilderness areas from human exploitation. I wondered if our partnership was part of something larger, if the Klandagi had awakened others like itself as the need for protection grew. On quiet nights when I patrol the same trails I've walked for decades, I sometimes encounter young rangers who remind me of myself before 1979, dedicated, caring, but limited by human laws and human abilities. I want to tell them that there are powers in the forest beyond their understanding, forces that will help them if they prove worthy. But that choice has to come from them, just as it came from me. The beast of Bladdenborough that people talk about today, that creature that appeared decades later and hundreds of miles away, I believe it was one of our kind, perhaps a ranger like me who accepted the gift, or maybe one of Tianta, the ancient guardians awakening to new threats. The pattern is always the same: mysterious deaths of those who harm the wilderness, followed by renewed respect for natural boundaries. Some call us monsters, others call us myths, But for those who truly love the wild places of the world, who understand that some things are worth protecting at any cost, we are what we have always been, guardians of the balance. The forest is still here, the deer still run free. The ancient trees still reach toward the sky, their roots deep in soil that has known their kind for thousands of years. And in the darkness between shadows, the shadow cat still watches, still waits, still judges those who would harm what cannot protect itself. As do I. My name is Marcus Ironside, and this is my story. Not all of it. There are things that must remain secret, powers that must stay hidden, choices that can never be fully explained, but enough to serve as a warning and perhaps as an invitation. The forest is watching. It has always been watching. And sometimes, if you prove worthy, it might choose to share its secrets with you. My name is Samuel Ravencrest, but everyone calls me Sam. For 17 years, I've worked as a ranger in Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest. Most folks think rangers just pick up trash and give directions to lost hikers. They don't know about the other part of my job, the part that keeps me awake at night. I'm what they call a railway safety coordinator. Sounds fancy, but it really means I inspect old train bridges and make sure kids don't get themselves killed playing on abandoned tracks. Kentucky's got more old railway lines than most states, and most of them haven't seen a working train in decades. The worst part of my job happens around Pope Lick Creek. There's an old railway trestle there, 800 feet long, 80 feet high, built back when trains were king. Every few years, some teenager thinks it would be fun to walk across it. Every few years, I have to help scrape what's left of them off the tracks below. People around here tell stories about that trestle. They call it the Pope Lick Monster's hunting ground. Say there's a creature up there, half man, half goat, that lures kids onto the bridge with a voice so beautiful you can't resist following it. Then it tears you apart with horns the size of baseball bats. I never believed any of that nonsense. Been working these woods too long to buy into local fairy tales. When kids died on that trestle, it was because they were stupid and unlucky. Train schedules change without warning. Metal gets slippery when it's wet. Panic makes people do dumb things. That's what I told myself anyway. That was before October 13th, 1991. I got the call at 6 in the morning. 3 teenagers found dead on the Pope Lick trestle. Not hit by a train. There hadn't been one through there in months. Just dead. Their bodies torn up so bad the sheriff couldn't tell what killed them at first glance. I grabbed my gear and drove out to Pope Lick Creek as the sun was coming up. The morning mist was still thick, making the old trestle look like a ghost bridge floating in white clouds. I'd been to that spot maybe 50 times in my career, but something felt different that morning. Wrong, somehow. Sheriff McKenzie was already there with the coroner. I could see the bodies from the ground, 3 dark shapes scattered across the wooden railway ties, 80 feet above us. The sheriff looked like he'd been sick. "How'd they even get up there, Sam?" he asked me. "Ladder's been removed for 5 years now." That was true. After too many accidents, the county had taken down the access ladder at both ends of the trestle. The only way up was to climb the support beams, and those were covered in bird droppings and slick with morning dew. Even a fit teenager would have trouble making that climb in daylight, let alone in the dark. "Maybe they brought ropes," I said. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't right. I'd searched the area. No ropes, no equipment. Nothing but 3 dead kids who somehow got themselves onto an impossible-to-reach railway bridge. The coroner finished his preliminary examination around noon. Dr. Peterson was a good man. Been doing his job longer than I'd been doing mine. But when he climbed down from that trestle, his face was white as paper. "I've never seen anything like it," he told the sheriff and me. "Those kids were gored. Massive puncture wounds like they were attacked by some kind of wild animal with huge horns. But the wounds are too clean, too precise, and there's something else." He showed us the photos he'd taken. I've seen plenty of death in my time, but these pictures made my stomach turn. The wounds were exactly like he said, too clean, too precise, like whatever killed them had been very careful about where it put its horns. "There are hoof prints up there, Dr. P," Ederson said quietly. "On the metal beams. cloven hoofprints pressed into steel like it was soft mud. That's when I started to think maybe the old stories weren't just stories after all. Went back to the trestle that evening, alone. I told myself it was for a proper safety inspection, but really I wanted to see those hoofprints for myself. The county would probably close off the area soon, and this might be my only chance to get a good look at the evidence. The climb up the support beams was harder than I expected. My hands kept slipping on the metal, and more than once I thought I might fall. By the time I pulled myself onto the trestle proper, the sun was setting and the first stars were coming out. The hoofprints were real. Deep impressions in solid steel, like someone had pressed a giant goat's foot into warm wax. I measured them with my tape. Each print was nearly 8 inches long and 6 inches wide. Whatever made them had to weigh at least 300 pounds. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was how the prints were arranged. They didn't follow the normal pattern of an animal walking. Instead, they seemed to dance across the trestle, sometimes on the wooden ties, sometimes on the metal rails, sometimes on the narrow steel beams where no earthly creature could keep its balance. I was taking photos with my camera when I heard the singing. At first I thought it was just wind through the metal beams. The trestle was famous for the weird sounds it made. Local kids called it the singing bridge, long before anyone started talking about monsters. But this was different. This was a real voice, clear and beautiful and impossibly sad. The song had no words, just a melody that seemed to wrap around my heart and squeeze. It reminded me of my wife Sarah, who'd died in a car accident 2 years earlier. It reminded me of all the lonely nights since then. All the mornings I woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there. Without really thinking about it, I started walking toward the sound. My feet found the railway ties automatically. And even though the light was fading and one wrong step would send me tumbling 80 feet to the rocks below, the singing grew louder, more beautiful, and I couldn't imagine why I'd ever want to be anywhere else but here, following this perfect voice into the gathering darkness. I was halfway across the trestle when my military training kicked in. 20 years in the Army before I became a ranger, and they'd taught me to recognize when someone was trying to mess with my head. The singing was too beautiful, too perfect. It was designed to make me stop thinking and start following. I forced myself to stop walking and really listen. The voice was coming from the far end of the trestle, where the bridge disappeared into a stand of dead pine trees. As I concentrated, trying to locate the exact source, I noticed something that made my blood turn cold. There was an echo, but it was wrong. The voice was singing from the far end of the bridge, but the echo was coming from directly beneath my feet, as if something was hanging under the trestle, singing up through the gaps between the wooden ties. I knelt down and peered through one of the gaps. In the fading light, I could just make out a dark shape clinging to the underside of the bridge. It was big, bigger than a person, and it was moving in rhythm with the singing. That's when I ran. I ran back across that trestle faster than I'd ever run in my life, not caring if I missed a step and fell. The singing followed me, getting louder and more insistent, and underneath it I could hear something else, a sound like hooves on metal, keeping pace with me as I fled. I made it to the support beam and slid down so fast I tore my palms open on the rough metal. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, and I didn't stop driving until I was back home with all my doors locked and all my lights on. That night, I dreamed about the sing-ing. In my dream, I followed it all the way across the trestle and down into the dead pine trees, where something was waiting for me in the shadows. Something with Sarah's face and the body of a beast. I woke up screaming. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 5 years. I needed to do some research, and I needed to do it before I lost my nerve completely. The Pope Lick monster stories went back a lot further than I'd realized. The oldest account I could find was in a newspaper from 1889 describing a demon goat man that had killed 2 railroad workers on the newly built trestle. The article said the creature appeared during the full moon and fed on the fear of its victims before tearing them apart. Every few years after that, there were more reports. Always the same pattern. Young people lured onto the trestle by beautiful singing, found dead with massive puncture wounds that no earthly animal could have made. The deaths always happened in groups of 3. and they always happened during the full moon. I checked my calendar. The next full moon was in 4 days. I spent those 4 days preparing. I wasn't going to run this time. Those 3 kids deserved better than that, and so did all the others who'd died over the years. If there really was something living on that trestle, something that fed on fear and death, then it was my job to stop it. I gathered everything I thought I might need. My service pistol from my Army days, loaded with silver bullets I'd had made at a shop in Louisville, a railroad blessing ritual I'd learned from Pastor Williams at the local church, something the old-time railroad workers used to protect themselves from evil spirits, a high-powered flashlight and backup batteries, and a pocket tape recorder in case I didn't make it back to tell anyone what I'd found. On the night of the full moon, I drove back to Pope Lick Creek. The trestle looked different under the bright moonlight, older, more twisted, like something that had been abandoned by God and left to rot in the darkness. I was checking my equipment. And one last time when I heard voices, young voices, laughing and daring each other to do something stupid. I looked up and saw 3 teenagers walking along the creek bank toward the trestle. They had flashlights and backpacks, and they were heading straight for the support beams. "Hey!" I shouted, running toward them. "Stop right there!" They turned to look at me. 2 boys and a girl, probably 16 or 17 years old. The kind of kids who thought they were invincible, who thought death was something that happened to other people. "You kids need to get out of here right now," I told them. "This area is closed. It's not safe." "Come on, mister," one of the boys said. "We're just going to walk across the bridge. It's like a rite of passage around here." "No," I said firmly. "You're going home, right now." But even as I was arguing with them, I could hear the singing starting up again, soft at first, barely audible over the sound of the creek, but growing stronger every second. The kids heard it too. I could see their expressions change, becoming dreamy and distant. "Do you hear that?" the girl whispered. "It's so beautiful." They started walking toward the trestle again, ignoring my shouted warnings. The singing was louder now, impossible to ignore. It tugged at something deep in my chest, promising peace and comfort and an end to all my pain. I forced myself to think about Sarah, about the night she died, about the drunk driver who'd taken her away from me. I used that pain, that anger, to keep my head clear while the kids walked like sleepwalkers toward the support beams. I couldn't let them climb up there. Whatever was on that trestle, it had killed too many already. I tackled the first boy just as he started climbing, knocking him away from the beam and into the soft mud by the creek. "Run," I shouted at all 3 of them. "Run now, and don't look back." The tackle had broken the spell, at least temporarily. The kids looked around in confusion, as if waking up from a dream. Then they heard my voice, really heard it, and saw the terror in my eyes. They ran, but the singing didn't stop. If anything, it got louder, more insistent, and now there was something else mixed in with it, the sound of hooves on metal, pacing back and forth across the trestle like a caged animal. I looked up at the bridge and saw it clearly for the first time. The creature was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with the lower body of a massive goat and the torso of a man. Its horns were exactly as the stories described, as big as baseball bats, curved and sharp enough to punch through steel. But the worst part was its face. Even at this distance, even in the uncertain moonlight, I could see that it was beautiful. Perfectly, impossibly beautiful. The kind of face that would make you follow it anywhere, even if you knew it meant your death. The creature saw me looking and smiled. Then it threw back its head and let out a sound that was part scream, part laugh, and part challenge. It wanted me to come up there. It wanted me to walk across that trestle and let it do to me what it had done to all the others. For a moment I almost did. The singing wrapped around my mind like silk, promising that it would be quick, that it would be painless, that afterwards I would see Sarah again. Then I remembered the kids I'd just saved, and all the other kids I might still be able to save. I pulled out my pocket tape recorder and started talking. "This is Samuel Ravencrest, Kentucky Forest Service. It's October 17th, 1991, and I'm at the Pope Lick Trestle. The creature is real. Repeat, the creature is real." The monster heard my voice and stopped singing. It stood perfectly still on the trestle, watching me, waiting. I started climbing. The climb up to the trestle was the longest of my life. Every rung of the support beam seemed to take forever, and with each foot I gained, the creature above me grew larger and more terrible. When I finally pulled myself onto the wooden ties, we were maybe 30 feet apart. Up close, the thing was even worse than I'd imagined. Its goat legs were covered in coarse black fur, ending in hooves that looked sharp enough to cut through bone. Its human torso was pale and muscled, with arms that hung almost to its knees. But it was the face that nearly broke my resolve. Beautiful wasn't the right word for it. It was perfect. The kind of face you might see in dreams or in paintings of angels. The kind of face that made you forget everything else existed. "Hello, Samuel," it said, and its voice was like honey poured over broken glass. "I've been waiting for you." "What are you?" I managed to ask. "I'm older than this bridge," it said, taking a step closer. "Older than this forest. I was here when the first train crossed these tracks, and I'll be here when the last one rusts away." As it spoke, its appearance began to change. The goat legs shortened and became human. The horns receded into its skull. The pale, perfect face became familiar. Sarah. It looked exactly like my dead wife. "I've missed you so much, Sam," it said in Sarah's voice. "Why don't you come closer? We have so much to talk about." Every instinct I had screamed at me to run to her, to hold her, to finally be with the woman I'd loved more than life itself. But I remembered what Dr. Peterson had said about the wounds on those 3 kids. I remembered the hoof prints pressed into solid steel. "You're not Sarah," I said, pulling out my pistol. "Sarah is dead." The thing wearing my wife's face laughed. "Dead? Oh, Samuel. Death is just another word for transformation. Sarah didn't die in that car accident. She came here. She came to me." It took another step closer, and now I could smell it. The sharp scent of goat musk mixed with something else, something like sulfur and old blood. "I've been feeding on death and fear for more than a century," it continued. "Every person who dies on this trestle makes me stronger. Every terrified moment before they realize what's happening feeds my power. And Sarah was so afraid when she died. So deliciously afraid." That's when I understood. This thing hadn't just killed my wife. It had been there when she died. It had fed on her terror in those last moments before the drunk driver's truck smashed into her car. I raised the pistol and fired all 6 silver bullets into its chest. The creature staggered backward but didn't fall. The wounds sealed themselves almost instantly, and when it looked at me again, Sarah's beautiful face was twisted with rage. "Silver bullets?" It laughed. "You think I'm some common werewolf? I am older than your species, older than your pathetic myths and legends." Its shape began to change again, expanding and growing more monstrous by the second. The goat legs returned, longer and more powerful than before. The horns erupted from its skull like twisted trees. When it smiled, I could see teeth like broken railroad spikes. "But I'll give you credit for courage, Samuel. Not many have faced me with such determination. As a reward, I'll make your death quick." It charged at me across the narrow trestle, hooves ringing against the metal rails like gunshots. I dove to one side, barely avoiding the sweep of those massive horns. The creature skidded past me and wheeled around for another attack. That's when I remembered the railroad blessing ritual Pastor Williams had taught me. I pulled out the small iron railroad spike he'd given me, blessed by every preacher in 3 counties, and began reciting the words he'd made me memorize. "By iron and steel, by sweat and blood, by the honest work of honest men, I cast you out." The creature shrieked and stumbled as if I'd hit it with a physical blow. The blessing was working, but not enough. It was still too strong, still too connected to this place. "You cannot destroy me here," it roared. "This trestle is my domain. Every death that has occurred here has made it more mine." That's when I realized what I had to do. The creature was bound to this bridge, fed by it, strengthened by it. If I could destroy the trestle itself— I looked down at the wooden ties beneath my feet, then at the steel support beams that held the entire structure together. The trestle was old, built in an era when safety regulations were just suggestions. All those support beams were connected, held in tension by cables that ran the entire length of the bridge. If I could weaken the right beam at the right place... The creature charged again. This time, I was ready for it. I stepped aside at the last second and swung the blessed railroad spike as hard as I could at the nearest tension cable. The spike bit deep into the braided steel, and I felt the entire trestle shudder. The creature felt it too. It spun around, its beautiful face contorted with fury, and for the first time, fear. "What are you doing?" it screamed. "Something I should have done years ago," I replied, and brought the spike down on the cable again. This time the cable snapped. The trestle lurched to one side, throwing both of us off balance. I could hear the support beams groaning under the shifting weight, and I knew we only had seconds before the entire structure came apart. The creature lunged at me one final time, its horns aimed at my heart. I met its charge head-on, driving the blessed railroad spike deep into its chest just as the trestle began its final collapse. I don't remember much about the fall. Just the sensation of tumbling through space, the creature's final scream echoing in my ears, and the thunderous crash as 800 feet of railway trestle came down like the wrath of God. I woke up 3 days later in Louisville General Hospital. Both my legs were broken, along with 4 ribs in my left arm. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. A fall like that should have killed me instantly. Sheriff Mackenzie came to visit on my second day of consciousness. He told me the official story. The Pope Lick trestle had finally succumbed to decades of weather damage and structural fatigue. A tragic accident, but one that had been inevitable for years. "Of course," he said quietly, "we found some interesting things in the wreckage. Pieces of something that looked almost like bone, but not quite. And there were these strange markings carved into the wooden ties, symbols that none of us recognized." He paused, studying my face carefully. "Funny thing is, Sam, those symbols, they were carved from underneath, as if something had been hanging below the trestle for a very long time, scratching at the wood." I didn't tell him about the creature. Who would have believed me? Instead, I just nodded and said that old bridges were full of mysteries. The sheriff accepted that, but I could tell he suspected there was more to the story. He left me with a warning. The county was going to clear away all the wreckage and seal off the Pope Lick Creek area permanently. If anything unusual happened there in the future, I was to call him immediately. I've been back to the site exactly once, 6 months after the collapse. The wreckage has been cleared away, just as the sheriff promised. Where the trestle once stood, there's nothing but empty air and a concrete foundation that will probably outlast us all. But sometimes, on very quiet nights, when the wind is just right, I can still hear singing coming from the direction of Pope Lick Creek. It's fainter now, weaker, but it's there. And sometimes I wonder if destroying the trestle really killed the creature, or just relocated it. I've kept the blessed railroad spike that Pastor Williams gave me. It sits on my bedside table within easy reach, and I've requested a permanent assignment to the Pope Lick Creek area, even though there's officially nothing there to patrol anymore, because I learned something important during those terrifying minutes on the collapsing trestle. Evil doesn't just disappear wet, and you defeat it. It finds new places to hide, new ways to feed, and it always remembers the people who fought against it. My name is Samuel Ravencrest, and I've seen the face of something that should not exist in our world. I've looked into the eyes of a creature that feeds on fear and death, and I've lived to tell about it. But I haven't stopped listening for that beautiful, terrible singing, and I never will.